Martha and I like to linger in bed for a few minutes every morning after the alarm goes off. After so many years, we knew what was best for us. Those warm, lazy extra minutes in bed must be paid for by a desperate struggle to get ready for work. A few years ago, the reckoning also included a mad dash to get kids ready for school. Now that our 2 children are gone, we find ourselves lingering in bed more and more often before the mad morning rush that precedes the drive to work. To make matters worse, I had to leave the house a good 20 minutes earlier than usual. Martha had to work late tonight, so instead of taking my car, we work close to each other, so we ride to work together. I decided to ride my mountain bike to work. The weather forecast also predicted a gorgeous spring day. I took the last bite of toast, washed it down with coffee, and was ready to go. "I'm on my way, honey," I shouted towards the bathroom, where Martha was still busy. I waited for her to stick her head out the door and talk to me, but I heard no answer. "See you tonight?" "I love you," I added after a few seconds. I was late and didn't have time to think about Martha's lack of response. I threw the keys into my backpack and went out. I'm Frank McKay, a 53-year-old office manager for the State Department of Public Works. My wife, Martha, 49, works as an administrative assistant in the main office of a manufacturing company. We're both better than average looking, but Martha is dazzling, if I may say so myself. She does not look her age. Many men look in her direction when we go out. 10 minutes later, I heard the whistle telling me I had received a text message. A few seconds later, my phone rang. It's hard enough to keep track of all the cars while cycling, and I didn't talk on the phone while driving. I answered calls at work. I got to work on time, but was so busy getting properly dressed for the 8:45 a.m. meeting that I left my cell phone in my backpack, forgetting about all the phone calls. Later, I followed a group of colleagues to lunch. Finally, during my afternoon coffee break, I remembered the phone calls. I had 5 messages from Martha, 2 messages, and 3 voicemails. The first text message was sent at 8:10 and read, "You took the wrong keys. Call me." The second message was sent at 8:35. "I'm waiting for your call." Then I listened to the voicemail. The first message was left at 8:11. "Hey, honey, you took the wrong set of keys when you left. Could you drop them off for me at work this morning? I need them. Call me." Her voice was a little harsh, and I didn't understand why. She doesn't need them. Keys at work. They use a modern key card security system. The second voicemail was left around 10:15 a.m. "What are you doing, Dave? I've been waiting for the keys all morning. Call me. I have more important things to do than just wait for you. I have known Martha for over 25 years, 23 years as my wife. It was obvious to me that she was royally angry. Anger and contempt oozed from every word. Before listening to her last voicemail, I took my keys out of my backpack and placed them on the table. I listened to the last message left at 12:55. "Where are you? I'm still waiting for my keys. I don't know what you were thinking about this morning, but I wish I had them on my desk this afternoon." This time, Martha did not hold back her anger. She almost screamed. I was stunned. Recently, I began to get used to the fact that Martha was angry with me over trifles. As she approaches 50, I thought that perhaps she was going through changes in her body that were causing her to act strangely. This was the explanation she gave me when I pointed out her change in behavior. She rebuked me when I asked her to see a doctor for hormone treatment or whatever they do for menopause. Life with Martha has recently become very difficult. Our relationship has been strained. But it was strange to see such an outburst over a set of keys that she didn't need. I worked on myself. I think the two can play a game of anger. I decided not to call her, but just wait until 5 o'clock to drop off the damn keys. Shortly after 5, I arrived at Martha's workplace. Surprise, surprise, I was just in time to see her pull out of the parking lot and head home. Despite the heavy traffic and the ability of my bike, I was never able to catch up with her. In any case, there was no use in doing this, since we were both returning home. I knew she would soon be out of heavy traffic and picking up a speed I couldn't match, so I decided to take my usual more direct route to try and beat her home. A few minutes later, I was taken by surprise when I saw her car heading to another area of the city. This was an easier route for me. I can take a shortcut through the park, but definitely not the best route for Martha. She turned onto A street lined with two-story duplexes and parked at the curb. I became suspicious, so I slowed down, watching her from afar as she walked up the stairs and rang the doorbell, typing a text on her phone. Even from where I stood in front of my bike, I heard her message ring. She read the message, returned to her car, and drove away. What the hell happened? I asked myself. Marta, who had to work late, arrived at an unknown apartment. I grabbed the set of keys I was holding in my hands to take a closer look. I recognized her car keys and our house keys. However, there was another clue that I didn't recognize. I had a feeling that this was the key that Martha was missing. I walked up to the duplex, walked up the stairs, inserted the key into the front door lock, and turned it. The click of the lock marked the end of my marriage to Martha. I didn't open the door. I needed to think. What should I do? My growing anger made it tempting to enter my wife's lover's apartment and destroy his things. Or I could wait for him and beat the crap out of him. Or I could just go to the police station and go straight to jail. No, blind anger was not the right answer, but I had to do something. I looked into the apartment. Technically, I was committing trespassing, but if I had rushed, I wouldn't have been caught. The first thing I saw was neatly folded mail on a small table in the hallway. I grabbed the phone bill. The letter was addressed to Steve Mueller. I had no idea who it was, but the phone bill might come in handy. I put it in my backpack. There was enough information for now. I didn't want to get caught spying in someone else's apartment, so I got the hell out of there. Instead of heading home, I drove to a nearby hardware store. Within minutes, I had a duplicate key. I expected Martha to be home, but her car was not in the driveway. I didn't know what her lover had written to her, but it had to be a message to meet him somewhere else. I decided to play a little with Martha. I called her, but she didn't answer. I didn't leave a text message, but I did send her a voicemail. I'm late too, but I'll bring the keys soon. I'll be in your office soon. It took a few seconds to get a response. It is not necessary. I took other measures. I just left my office. Just go home, was her immediate response. In her head, she probably added, and leave me alone, dumbass. I had a shitty evening. Martha returned home only at 10 o'clock. This gave me a good 4 hours to decide what to do. First, I wanted evidence of her cheating. With the copy I now had on my keychain, it would have been a piece of cake to do what I needed to do. The phone bill was indicative of her lover in itself. They constantly talked on the phone and texted each other, even in the evenings when Martha and I were together. All this time I thought that she was corresponding with our children. Do I really need to know why she decided to leave me? No. It didn't matter now. Our love has faded over the past 6 months. It may take so much indifference, reproaches, and nagging before a man's love begins to fade. I now realized that my loving wife was moving away from our marriage, but I never knew it. Today's revelation was the final blow to a very shitty marriage. We're done. In our state, there is no benefit to proving adultery. Irreconcilable differences would be the motive, and the judge would split our assets 50-50. But as a betrayed husband, I felt I had a lot to achieve to regain some of my pride. I won't let Martha lie while she's married. The reason will be made public to our children, parents, and friends. Knowing how much Martha has changed over the past few months, I wouldn't be surprised if she tried to somehow make me the bad guy. I did play with a lot of revenge scenarios, but decided not to go down that route. I only had a few years until early retirement, and I didn't want to mess it up. Retirement wouldn't have been what I imagined all those years ago when I lived with Martha, but it was better than going to jail and losing my job. Now at least I will enjoy my retirement the way I wanted, not the way Martha wanted. I decided to face Martha's annoyance when she returned from her date so that it would work in my favor. Her anger may lead to a small argument and will excuse my icy behavior over the next few days. However, sex with Steve must have calmed her down a bit. Now that I was paying attention, I realized that she was averting my eyes a little. When Martha finally returned home, she was surprised to see me still sitting in the living room. She tossed the spare car key into the container we keep by the door and grabbed her own set of keys that I had put there earlier. She glanced at the keys and threw them into her purse. I expected some grumbling, but she didn't say a single word. She headed straight to the bathroom. "I'm tired," she said to someone in the corridor. "I'll take a shower and go straight to bed." "What?" I asked. "No love tonight?" Her only response was to close the bathroom door behind her and lock it. Do you know a lot of married people who lock their bathroom door? I hadn't noticed this before, but it happened often when Martha returned from working late. Oh my God, I was so stupid. No wonder she's leaving me. Before going to bed, I watched the evening show. I hoped Martha was fast asleep. I swear she was still awake. Sleep was eluding her too. The next morning, under the pretext of a meeting, I left early in my car. Instead of working, I went to an online store and bought some interesting things. It only took me a couple of hours to connect Miller's apartment to sound and video. Having been in the apartment for so long, I had time to look around. It was very well furnished. Many of the items looked like antiques. I don't know if he had a maid, but his apartment was spotless. Not a speck of dust to be seen anywhere. I wonder if he was obsessed with cleanliness. This was food for thought. I was hoping my little spy gear would go undetected for a few days, at least long enough to get some juicy footage from my wife and her lover. I shouldn't have worried about that. Returning to the office after lunch, I received another message from Martha, in which she asked me not to wait for her since she had another late meeting. I made an appointment with a lawyer the next day. That evening, I drove past Mueller's apartment and saw Martha's car. Despite everything I'd been through in the last 24 hours, I still felt like my heart was drowning with yet another proof of her betrayal. Tomorrow will be a decisive day. I drove back to the house. I was tempted to just check into a motel in town, but it would be ridiculous to go to such an expense when it wasn't my fault. When I got home, I thought about spending the night in the guest bedroom, but again I decided that I wasn't the one who ruined our marriage. Let Martha sleep there. I moved all her things into the guest bedroom in disarray. I would just grab whole drawers, dump them on the bed, and then take clothes off her side of the closet and throw them in there. Overall, a very calming activity. I felt better with every armful I carried into her room. When she returned home that evening, she looked worse than the night before. She had the post-sex look she might have after a 5-hour sex fest. And again, she was surprised to see me. She did not explain her lateness or appearance, as if she could explain the reason. I couldn't believe I could cause such pain. Knowing that the threat of divorce was looming over us, I grabbed her hand and dragged her towards the bedrooms. "What are you doing, Frank?" "You're hurting me," she whined. I forced myself to sound more confident than I felt. I knew I was minutes away from losing her. I had to act quickly. I had to control myself. "Shut up, bitch," I said loudly. It was so out of character for me to say things like I had hit her. Suddenly, the accusing looks I had been receiving for the past months were replaced by fear. But what kind of fear? Fear of violence or fear of exposure? I had no way of knowing and wasn't going to ask. I opened the guest bedroom so she could see her things stacked there. "Starting tonight, bitch," I said sharply. "Is it your room?" And I pushed her inside. "We are no longer husband and wife. Stay away from me." I warned her. In fact, it would be better if you just packed your things and left right now. Martha was irritated and angry. She struggled trying to leave the room. "Oh no, bastard! If any of us sleeps in the guest room, it's you," she said. "I broke my back taking care of the kids, you in the house. Show some respect or leave the house." Did I want to argue with her? "No!" I pushed her forcefully back into the guest room, surprising us both with the force of my action. "I'm giving you 2 options," I growled at her. "Either you sleep here until our divorce is final, or you go live with Steve Mueller right now." His name hit her like a karate chop. Despite her behavior in recent months, Martha still knew me better than anyone. She realized that I knew about her betrayal, and she knew that I had no forgiveness. She knew that I would never accept her back into my life, and we would not part as friends. Who wants to be friends with someone who stabbed you in the back? I could see in her eyes that she didn't expect to get caught, and she wasn't prepared for confrontation. Within seconds, I saw defeat written all over her face. She backed into the bedroom, took off her clothes, and sat on the bed. Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. She said something that I didn't hear. "What?" I barked. "Sorry," she said a little louder. "I was so stupid. Please don't hate me." "You know me, Martha," I said. "I won't hate you after a while, but I'm sure I won't love you either. Damn, I don't know if I can just be around you." I started to close the door, but I wanted to hurt her a little more. "I'd rather do it quickly," I said decisively. "I would appreciate it if you left as soon as possible. Just sign the divorce papers you'll receive soon, and we'll never have to meet again." I closed the door, speaking to Martha one last time before the trial. The last sound I heard was her sobs. The next day, I picked up my spy equipment from Miller's apartment. Next stop was my lawyer. Since my demands were simple, he assured me that the divorce papers could be delivered within 2 days. I paid him an advance and left. I tried to get back to work, but it was more than useless. I finally explained my predicament to my boss, who told me to take a few days off. I drove home, but when I arrived, I saw Martha in the process of moving, and I parked down the street. From the video I watched, I recognized Steve Miller helping her. I had the urge to beat him, but the extra 3 inches and 40 pounds he had against me made it more of a wish than a possibility. I left. Later that evening, I felt for the first time the real impact of Martha's betrayal. My anger disappeared, replaced by loneliness like I had never experienced. Divorce would have been more traumatic if our children were still living with us. What was a blessing was also a curse, as I had no one to turn to for comfort. My parents died, my brother and sister lived on the other side of the country. I decided to contact my 2 daughters. I was surprised to hear that Martha had not yet contacted them. She called and wrote to them constantly in college. I think it was easier for her to lie to me than to her children. A few weeks ago, if someone had asked me about proper behavior towards a cheated spouse, I would advocate prudence, keeping the peace, and respecting 23 years of devotion as a mother and wife. Now suffering, desperate for love or at least sympathy, I told my 2 daughters, Mandy and Tess. I felt good knowing that neither of them doubted me when I told them their mother cheated on me, left me for another man. For a moment, I thought they might have known about their mother, but they were very upset by the news, and I dismissed the thought. My barely controlled sobs also helped convince them. Their understanding was a great comfort to me. I made a big mistake that day. By the time I finished calling the kids, I had already drunk 1 full bottle of wine. I'm not a big drinker. Martha and I might drink 1 or 2 bottles of wine a week, and sometimes 6 bottles of beer. The mistake wasn't the drinking. It was alcohol-induced self-pity. When faced with failure, a man must take responsibility for such failure, but try as I might, I could not understand what I had done to push Martha away. My work has never been an obstacle to my family life. I didn't have to travel maybe once every 5 years for retraining. My overtime work was limited to a few fixed periods per year. To be honest, I've probably let myself go a little over the last few years since I turned 50, but I was in no way overweight or out of shape. Miller didn't seem much younger or in better shape than me. I wondered if he was a better lover, an area in which my knowledge was rather meager. I didn't have much experience before I met Martha, only 4 friends between the ages of 18 and 28, and Martha and I had a lot to learn together after we met. I don't think Martha abandoned me for social status either. His apartment did not seem outlandish. His pieces of furniture showed more than anything else, but he was not the father. We were probably in the same income group. As I curled up in the fetal position for the night, it occurred to me that there was no good reason why she left. Only that I was who I was. Can you struggle with being yourself? Can I stop existing so that everything will be okay? My call the next morning came at about 10 o'clock. I picked up the phone without looking at the caller ID. "You son of a bitch!" Martha screamed. "You shouldn't have been so rude to Mandy and Tess." For a second, I wanted to just hang up, but part of me wanted a confrontation so this whole nightmare could be put behind me. "How rude, honey?" I asked. "The fact that you cheated on me for months, or how you moved in with your lover? Or is it all of the above? There was only silence. I hate silence. Martha, there's a part of me that still loves you, I said. I won't say whether it's my feminine part or my masculine part, maybe my stupid part, but there is one thing I will never do: lie to our family. You won't dare, she begged. Not Dad, please. Watch me, I said, and hung up. My finger hovered over the speed dial button for Martha's father, but I didn't press it. Harvey has been miserable since his wife died of breast cancer 2 years ago. He was a very good man, but at 80 years old, his health was a little fragile. I think his will to live was a little weak. Today, of course, I could understand it, and he was a good man. I might as well let him die in peace instead of ruining his life because of his daughter's behavior. My anger was receding. I decided to inform Martha of my decision. I took Mueller's phone bill and dialed the number on it. A male voice answered. I hesitated for a second. Martha McKay, please, I asked. There was silence on the line for a moment. I heard someone crying in the background, obviously Martha. Who's asking? Asked Mueller. Her father, you fucking piece of shit, I lied, unable to contain the wave of indignation. Oh, and forget about talking to her. Just tell my daughter not to call me. Forget I exist, and leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and me alone. Bye, idiot. Less than a minute later, feeling a little remorseful, I dialed Martha's cell phone number. She answered almost immediately, but didn't say anything. She was still hiccuping from tears. Hello, Martha. I broke the silence. Did you have a great day? Frank, why? She asked. Why did you tell my father? This will destroy him. He has been in such poor health lately. You knew that. Hey, don't shift the blame, bitch, I said, since such an insult was difficult to utter. It wasn't your father who talked on the phone with your asshole. It was me. I love your father, and I know that you would kill him with your behavior. I want to emphasize something here. Are you listening to me? Yes, she said. I'm listening to it. Don't ever let that guy come between me and my girls, or your father will find out everything about you. All the gross details, as you put it correctly, I told her. Don't think I'm joking. I trusted you most of my adult life. I didn't know it was possible, but you broke that trust. I'm repeating myself, but I have to fight with myself, not to just shoot you on the spot. I have a lot of hatred in my heart for you, and that is what defines me at this moment. Understood? Yes, she finally said between sobs. Mark, she sobbed. I'm really sorry. I never wanted this. Me too, I answered, and he hung up. 6 months later, I received official papers declaring the official end of my marriage. I had recovered from my bout of depression, but there was still something missing in my life. I couldn't figure out what exactly. I dated a few women but didn't get very far. They probably found out that I had a lot of baggage. I had a one-night stand with a work friend who was divorced like me. Sex seemed empty without love and affection. We were just two adults desperate for relief, but it left me feeling worse alone than before. One evening, returning from work, I finally had an epiphany. After moving into my new apartment, we sold the house to split the proceeds. I said hello to a new friend who appeared 2 weeks ago. Hello, Jack, I said, looking behind the door. I was reminiscing about my single days, naming the dust bunnies that accumulated everywhere in my home, mostly behind doors and under my bed. Jack stood at the front door while Roger and Bugs lived under the bed. I was almost ready to pick up the vacuum cleaner in the closet, embarrassed by the thought that Mueller would never have left his apartment in such a state. I realized that I still hated this guy. I also realized what was missing in my life was getting even with him and Martha. Of course, for a while, I thought a good beating was in order, but prison didn't appeal to me. I realized that I would never be able to move on unless I found at least a small measure of revenge. I spent the evening cleaning the apartment and thinking about revenge. Jack being sucked into the vacuum was a revelation. I had my own plan. The following Friday, I followed Martha and Miller to the pub. While they were inside, I installed a GPS tracker on his car. They sat down at a table, and I sat on a stool. from which I could watch Martha in the mirror behind the bar. A few minutes later, she noticed me and said something to Muller. He looked in my direction. I placed the bill on the counter and walked out of the bar, pretending to be unaware of their presence. I'm pretty sure he would recognize me by now. Over the next few weeks, I made several visits to Miller's apartment, monitoring his movements. He usually had a quick lunch at a restaurant near his work. One day I went there with a friend whom I instructed on what to say. We sat down at a table next to Mahler. We ordered lunch and started chatting. "So," my friend Terry asked, at my signal, "how lonely is life? Do you miss your ex?" "Well, it was difficult at first," I answered. "Martha really took me by surprise. She has always been a good liar throughout our life together, but she really led me astray on this matter." "What does a good liar mean?" my friend asked. "Did she lie a lot?" "Well, not often, but enough to recognize it as a personality flaw," I said. "For example, 3 years ago, her car was dirty, so she borrowed my car to go to a meeting. She returned in the evening with a large dent on the driver's door. She argued with me that this was the case in the morning when she took it. I washed the car the day before and knew full well that this was not the case. However, after 25 years, you learn to allow these things to happen to your wife." "How is your personal life?" asked Terry. "That's one of the good things about getting rid of that bitch," I said. "I have 2 friends with benefits, without any obligations, and at least 10 years younger than Martha. I'm very glad I got rid of it. You know the saying, once a cheater, always a cheater. But let's talk about something else. What do you think of Seahawks?" We ended lunch analyzing the Seahawks' chances of making it to the Super Bowl. The next day, again at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I went to Muller. These days I have started having late lunches. I took my checklist and read the remaining items, leaving the tap dripping. Check. Leave the ceiling fan on in the bathroom. Check move forks, spoons, and knives in their drawer. Check move a few pots and pans. Check take a red toothbrush, Martha's color all these years, and leave it on the sink. Check I took the cup and placed it under the tap to wet it. I then took the cup and left it on the clean coffee table in the living room. After a few minutes, I was sure that she had left a mark on his antique table. Another day, I turned on the coffee pot, then turned on the ceiling fan again, sprinkled some cigarette ash at the base of the toilet. I also took a porcelain trinket from the living room, broke it in a paper bag, and left a small shard of ceramic on the floor. Everything was done within 1 month. I regretted that I no longer had spy equipment in my apartment to see how things were going between lovers. However, my children kept in touch with their mother. I never asked them about her, but they would occasionally drop tidbits of information. It was Mandy who first told me that things were a little tense between Martha and Muller. It's time to turn up the heat a little between the 2 lovers. One day, a friend tripped while walking past Muller and, accidentally, left a mark of lipstick on his shirt and blonde hair on his shoulder. Martha's hair was dark. The following week, I went to Muller's apartment and left a pair of underwear among his underwear. We wear very different styles. I knew he was mine when he left work at lunchtime one day. I followed him to his apartment. He stopped, carefully walked up the stairs, and entered his apartment. A minute later, he left and returned to his workplace. Gotcha. The next day, I tore off a corner of the condom wrapper and left it on the floor by the bed. I pulled the blanket up, jumped up and down in the middle of the bed a little to disturb the sheets, and put the blanket back almost exactly the way it was. I also left imprints of 2 glasses on the coffee table, some ash in the toilet, and a running ceiling fan. I took another porcelain bauble, broke it, and threw it in the trash. I grabbed a rare bottle of wine from the shelf, chose the one with the most dust on it, opened it, poured it down the drain, and left the empty one in the trash. This was my grand finale. That evening, my phone rang. It was my youngest, Tess. "Daddy, Daddy, you have to do something," she screamed. "Everything for you, darling," I said. "Help, Mom," she said, barely holding back her sobs. "She's at the police station. This guy hit her, and she called the police. She has nowhere to go. She doesn't want to go back there anymore. He's been getting pretty violent lately," and she said, "Hold on, darling." I interrupted her. "I'm not the person who can help your mother. I hate her to the core, and I have to admit that I really like what happens to her. Not the beating, but the complete fiasco with her boy toy. What's happening around? Dad, Tess begged. She is my mother and she needs help. Good, good. It's only because you ask, I said. Don't expect me to do anything more than just pick her up and drop her off. Thank you, Dad. A few minutes later, I was at the police station. She was still under interrogation. So I had to wait a little, but I sent her a note telling her I was waiting for her. I have to admit, an hour later I felt terrible when I saw Martha with a bruise on her left eye. She burst into tears when she saw me, walking towards me with open arms. I struggled with myself, but was able to reach out my arms to keep her at arm's length. Hey, I'm here because my daughter asked me to come, I said. Never think that we will become friends. I'll give you a ride wherever you want, that's all. I walked out of the police station without looking back to see if she was following me, her sobs the only sign that she was nearby. Once in the car, I asked, "Where do you want to go?" "Home," she answered. Without saying a word, I drove to my destination. Martha only reacted when I turned onto Miller Street and parked in front of the house. "I don't want to go there," she said, holding back tears. "Listen, Muller is in prison now. This leaves you plenty of time to pack your things and leave." She looked at me for a few seconds, then got out of the car and headed into the apartment. Soon she began taking out trash bags with her clothes. She didn't take much when she left me, so she finished it quickly. As soon as she finished, we left. A few minutes later, she asked where we were going. I heard the fear in her voice. "We're going to see your father," I told her. "You said you wanted to go home. You have no other home." We drove in silence for a few more minutes. Her father lives far away in the suburbs. "I didn't have the opportunity to apologize to you," Martha said, breaking the silence. "I regret what I did. I was stupid and you caught me cheating. I accept it. But I never stopped loving you. I just forgot what it meant for a while. I didn't even want to live with Steve. We had little in common. I want to tell you that I'm sorry for hurting you." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Could I have said, "It's no big deal"? In any case, could I tell her that I forgive her? That would be a lie, since I still resented the way she ruined our marriage. I fell silent. I think my silence hurt her more than any rant I could have made to let her know how much she had hurt me. I still couldn't understand how you could swear your love to a man and then hurt him so seriously. Outside her father's house, Martha looked at me. "What will I tell my father?" she asked. It left me speechless. What the fuck? We were divorced for several months, and she didn't tell her father. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "Harvey doesn't know we're divorced?" "Well, I just told him that we had problems," Martha said. "Now you're definitely in trouble," I replied. "Find a good reason, but don't make me the bad guy. Otherwise, I'll hear about it and tell him the truth." It was already late, but I did not offer to help Martha move things to her father's house. First of all, I enjoyed her suffering a little. Secondly, I didn't want to talk to Harvey. The next day, I parked across the street from Muller's house. He returned home shortly before noon. It's time to put the final nail in the coffin of their flirtation. I grabbed the cheapest bottle of Chilean wine I'd bought on the way, a $10 investment, and walked up the stairs. Muller opened the door and was surprised when he recognized me. "Hello," I said. "We've never met, but I'm Frank McKay, Martha Sharp's ex-husband. I offered him a bottle of wine and he took it. Here, take this so you know I'm not a freeloader." "This will replace the other bottle of wine I threw away," I said. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key, the key to his apartment. I gave it to him. "Oh, I won't need that either." Martha moved out last night. I smiled the whole way to my car. I was in high spirits knowing that Mueller would regret losing his $900 bottle of Chateau Montelena more than losing Martha. I had a spring in my step. Revenge can be so sweet. I think I can move on now that I burned that bitch. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Second story. My name is John David Martin, and I'm a police officer. No, that's not entirely correct. I'm more than a cop. I'm an investigator with the Tyler County Crime Task Force in Texas. My title is Special Agent. I am good at my job and rarely fail to complete the tasks assigned to me. I know that sounds selfish, and in some ways it is, but I'm also just stating facts. I was doing one thing. It was a hot case: the rape of 2 young girls and the kidnapping of one of them. This became news and will be in people's memories and minds for many years to come. Everyone who knows me calls me JD, including my beautiful wife, Eliso. We have been married for 5 years and have no children. I think our marriage is pretty normal, and most of the time I would call it special. Ellie is actually very pretty and sweet. We grew up together and were always good friends, and it just blossomed into love and eventually engagement and then marriage. She was always the best thing that ever happened to me, and a lot of good things happened to me. Bill Jacobs, my boss, was the director of our task force, and many years ago, he took a liking to me and my work. Because of this, I had every opportunity for advancement, and I did not miss any of them. I'm 32 years old and second in command on the task force. I know it had a lot to do with Bill's support, but I also earned it by doing a great job. A year ago, Bill called me into his office and told me that there had been a double rape and that one of the girls was in the hospital and the other had been kidnapped. The girls were sisters, Mary and Janice Schindler. Mary was 16 years old and Janice was 17. According to Mary, their uncle Josh Schindler picked them up from school and took them to his lair. She said he and his friend Garvey Smithson raped them repeatedly. Mary was in pretty bad shape emotionally and physically, and the 2 men decided to take her to the hospital and leave with Janice. Both men had always been a little unstable, but they had never done anything like this before. Bill knew he shouldn't have asked me to take on this case, but he did. He told me that he thought if anyone could find Janice and arrest Josh and Harvey, it would be me. I, like everyone else, was sick of the facts, and I agreed to take on this case. I took Gina Darling, one of our employees who works with me most of the time, and went to the hospital to meet Mary. Gina does a fantastic job, and I trust her with my life. I knew she would be invaluable in talking to Mary. Mary's condition had stabilized, and she was ready to testify with all the details she could remember. Mostly Gina, carefully walked her through the whole ordeal, gathering as much information as possible without upsetting the young girl any more than she already was. She was incredibly brave and was able to tell us everything. When we finished, I told Mary that we would do everything we could to find Janice and bring her uncle and his friend to justice. I never make promises because you never know what you can do, but I wanted to make a promise to this girl. I think she knew I would give it my all. Gina and I worked tirelessly on this case. We worked 18 hours a day for 3 days in a row. In short, I was obsessed with the case, and so was Gina. I believe this is where the cracks in my relationship with Ellie began. She complained to me that I was working too much. She complained that I was spending too much time with Gina. I looked at her while she was tearing me apart and couldn't believe it was my sweet wife. I told her there was a scared and abused 17-year-old girl who was counting on me to find her before they killed her, and I'd be damned if I was going to relax until I found her. I guess I pretty much told Ellie to suck it up and stop being so selfish. Well, on the 4th day, we had a break. Someone spotted Harvey in Creighton, a small town on the border of our county. He went into a grocery store to buy some supplies and was seen by someone who recognized him. There were several photographs of Josh and Harvey in the newspapers, but not everyone had seen them yet. We're lucky this guy saw the news. Several SUVs containing officers converged on Creighton, but when we got there, Garvey was nowhere to be seen. Presumably, he had just left the city and headed south. I knew this part of the county quite well and developed a plan for how we could systematically check all possible shelters in the area. We started by setting up a perimeter 10 miles from Creighton. We then began to spread out to cover the area. Once again, we were lucky. Just 3 hours after Harvey was spotted, we found a shack in the desert. And sure enough, Janice was there. She was brutalized and beaten, but was alive. We were able to call a medical helicopter, and she was flown to a hospital in Tyler. Unfortunately, Josh and Harvey somehow slipped past us and were nowhere to be seen. I knew they would be hard to find. but I was determined that they would not get away with this, and I promised myself that I would find them and see them punished for what they did to these two girls. We returned to Tyler and Gina, and I went to the hospital to check on both girls. Janice had surgery for vaginal and anal tears and was recovering. Gina and I just sat and talked about this case, and I made it clear to her that I would find these two bastards, even if it was the last thing I ever did. I could tell that Gina was also very excited about the whole thing, so I gave her a little hug and smiled to calm her down. I told her that we will catch these people and bring them to justice. When we had a chance to go inside and talk to Janice, she told us that her Uncle Josh and Garvey had decided to leave her there and were going to go to the hard places, as they put it. She thought she heard them say something about South Texas, but she wasn't sure. Apart from the details of the rape and abduction, she could not have been more helpful in locating the two men. We were overjoyed that both girls were safe and that they would recover soon. I knew they would need extensive counseling and ongoing support from their friends and family, but I was confident that they would be okay. On the last day of that week, I promised them that I would find their uncle and his friend and bring them here. I know, I shouldn't have promised them, but I was confident that I would succeed. I think that's where the story really begins. I was still obsessed with finding these two men. I don't apologize for this, but it's true. I spent most of my time working on this case. I followed leads that others thought were cold. I wanted justice, and I didn't want to break my promise to Mary and Janice. Needless to say, the situation got worse at home. Ellie kept telling me that it was stupid of me to work so hard on this case. Both girls were found and both got better. I kept telling her that bringing Josh and Garvey to justice would help in the ultimate healing of these two teenagers, and she kept telling me that I should leave it at that. I worked on this case for 5 weeks, and our relationship became more and more strained every day. Then we caught our latest break in this case. It was Tuesday morning when I was informed that the bastards had been arrested in Lake Charles, Los Angeles on a DUI charge the night before, and the arresting officer was the cousin of the police chief in Beaumont, Texas. I've been in contact with the Beaumont police chief, Manny Grayson, numerous times over the last 5 weeks because I've been following up on leads down south. He let me know that they were in custody in Lake Charles and would be held for the maximum number of days to give us time to consider extradition. In 2 days, all the extradition paperwork for the two men from Louisiana to Texas was processed, and I made arrangements to pick them up on Friday. Me and Gina were going to go to Lake Charles and bring the prisoners back to Texas. I figured the trip would take me about 5 hours each way, so I planned to leave around 4 a.m. so we could pick up Josh and Garvey by 10 a.m. and be back in Tyler before 5 p.m. When I got up in the morning and was ready to leave, I leaned over Ellie and kissed her forehead. I said, "Goodbye, dear. When I get home tonight, this will all be over, and I will make it up to you for all the time I wasted on this matter." Her response was less enthusiastic than I expected when she said, "Well, don't rush back because of me, JD. I'm sure I'll find something to do until you get back. I've been on my own for the past 6 weeks, so this won't be anything new. It was just as bitchy as she had been with me this whole time. Now I knew I wasn't paying enough attention to her, but I thought she knew how much I loved her and that it was just a temporary thing. I thought she would be overjoyed, but all I heard was sarcasm. I knew I would have to do a lot to make it up to her, and I was more than willing to do it. I missed her too, but this case was very important for those girls, for our city, and for me. I would make it up to her. When I left the house, I was in full gear. I had everything I needed to bring these idiots back to justice with the death penalty. I arranged for Gina to come with me, as I knew this was something special for her too. So I stopped at the police station and picked her up, as we had agreed in advance. We drove in silence for about 2 hours, both thinking about our own thoughts about the events of the past day. I looked at her a couple of times and she was deep in thought, so I didn't say anything. Suddenly the silence was broken by the ringing of our phone. Gina took it and listened for a minute, then handed it to me saying, "This is the boss." "This is JD, I said. "What happened, Chief?" "JD, Slow down so we can talk, he replied. I found a place to pull off the road, and Bill told me that Louisiana had lifted its extradition order. Apparently, an enterprising assistant district attorney had thought to do a DNA comparison between Josh and Garvey and had obtained information about an unsolved rape and murder 8 months earlier. Since they had a murder along with a rape, it was decided that Louisiana would prosecute first, and therefore we would not be able to take them with us to Texas. Although Gina and I were not happy that we did not get justice in our own jurisdiction, we both understood that their case had the greatest potential for the death penalty. In Texas, because there was no murder, we could probably only give them life sentences. We reluctantly agreed to leave the current charge to Louisiana. We didn't really have a choice. They had these bastards, but we didn't. However, I spoke with Manny on the phone to be sure that he would inform the Louisiana court system that the two should be held without bail, as they were clearly flight risks and were facing additional criminal charges in Texas. He assured me that he would contact his cousin and that they would not be released. When all the talking was over, we turned around and headed back to Tyler. Bill told us to take some time off since there were no pressing investigations going on now that Josh and Harvey were in custody. On the way back, we stopped for breakfast and I dropped Gina off at her house around 11 a.m. and headed home. When I returned home and opened the garage door, someone else's car was parked in my space. I know there's always an unfamiliar car parked outside the poor guy's house, but it was true. It was a bright red Mustang, and I thought I knew whose it was. It was one Billy Marconi, the local badass. I, of course, had a very bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, and even before I entered the house, I felt the rage building within me. I knew what I would find, and I knew I wouldn't like it. I quietly entered through the garage into the utility room, and from there I walked through the kitchen, the hallway, and up the stairs to the bedroom. There were no clues around, as you might expect, no shoes or piles of clothes. But as I walked up the stairs, I heard them in the master bedroom. Oh God, Billy, you satisfy me so well. Each time seems to be better than the last, Ellie moaned. Do you like my hot man tool, Ellie? It's better than your asshole husband, isn't it? Answered Billy. Oh God, yes, Billy. You know how to make me feel like a complete slut, and I love it. JD loves me, and he would never make me feel like a slut, but I love it when you use me. Just fuck me, she said intermittently. As I walked down the hall to the bedroom, I could feel the blood pounding in my head, and I knew I was pretty much out of my mind. I reached for my gun and was about to pull it out of the holster when my hand caught the taser that every officer carries when transporting prisoners. It was probably good that my hand touched it, because there is no telling what I would have done with the gun. When I looked into the room, I saw Ellie's ass and Billy had it from behind. I quietly entered the room with a stun gun in my hand, was able to stand right behind him and hit him right in the ass and genitals. He fell like a stone onto Ellie's back, and when she threw him off of her, I hit her too. Once they were both passed out, I took out one set of handcuffs and handcuffed Ellie to our bed. There was no way she could get away from me or stop me from doing what I was about to do to Billy. I then handcuffed Billy and dragged him by his feet from the bedroom down the hallway to the basement door. I think he hit his head a couple of times rolling down the stairs, but I really didn't care. I handcuffed him, wrapped his arms around one of the support beams, blindfolded him, and gagged him. By this time, he was starting to come around again, and I let him. You completely lost your mind when you decided to have sex with a policeman's wife. I'll be back to take care of you a little later, Billy. Don't go anywhere. I told him with an evil laugh before I hit him with the taser again. I returned to the bedroom and sat on the chair next to the bed. Ellie was crying quietly, and my heart hurt. But at that moment, my anger at what I had discovered was stronger than my compassion. I took out a stun gun and placed it on the bed in full view of her. Allison, I said, I have a few questions for you, and you better answer them honestly. If you don't answer honestly, I will use the stun gun on you over and over again until I find out the truth. I'll know it's true if you and Billy give me the same answers. So here are the questions I asked her. How long have you and Billy been having sex? How many times have you been together? Where did you meet to have sex? Does anyone else know that you had sex with Billy? Do you like sex with him more than with me? These were her answers. Today is the only time I had sex with Billy. Just this time. Only here this one time. Nobody else knows. And no JD sex with him was better than with you. Only I already heard her say, each time seems to be better than the last time. And, oh God, yes, Billy, you know how to make me feel like a complete slut, and I love it. JD loves me, and he would never make me feel like a slut. But I love it when you use me. Just fuck me. So I knew she was lying to me, and I told her so. Allison, these answers are not true. I warned you what lying to me would lead to. I raised the stun gun and gave her a full charge again. When she came to her senses, I told her, I'm going to talk to Billy, so while I'm gone, you better think about the right answers. I'll be back. I took my stun gun with me and headed to the basement. I knew almost exactly what would happen when I asked Billy the same questions. I knew he would lie, and I knew I would hit him a couple of times. Believe me, I hoped this would be the case. I growled at him. You piece of shit. I'll give you 10 seconds to tell me the truth. Next time I ask questions, or I'll fry your brains with this thing and feed your dead and smoking body to the fucking coyotes in the desert. I hit him full force several times. His whole body went limp, but twitched a little. Then he came to his senses, and I asked, 10 seconds, Billy. Remember that. When did it start? I started counting 10, 9, 8, 7. When I got to 5, he blurted out, about 6 weeks ago. How many times did you and Ellie have sex? At least once a week each of those 6 weeks, and sometimes it was twice a week, so maybe 8 or 9 times. Where did you do this? Always here, in your bed. When you were going to leave for a while, she called and I came. Does anyone else know that you had sex with my wife? No, I kept it with me. Some of my boyfriends know that I am dating a woman, but no one knows who or where I am going to meet her. Billy, is there anything else you'd like to add? Is it true this time? No, Guy, this is the whole truth. You know, I regret doing it, but you know she hit on me and everything, and you know how it is, man. Guys just aren't strong enough to say no. Big mistake, that stupid bastard should have kept his mouth shut. I told him, I'll be back later to finish up with you, Billy. Don't go anywhere. And I gave him another long taser, just because he made me angry. I went back upstairs to Ellie and said, well, Billy seems to have told the truth. He doesn't seem to like the stun gun very much, so he came clean about it. Are you ready to be honest with me now? Answer the questions, Allison. She couldn't look at me, but she began. The first time was about 6 weeks ago. We were together once or twice a week for every week, so that's maybe 8 or 9 times. He always came here and always in this bed. Nobody knows JD anymore. And I really enjoyed the sex because it was so dirty. But I love you and the way you make love to me. JD, I'm so sorry. Allison, I know you're sorry now. But what I don't know is whether you regret doing it or being caught. And I can never know for sure. And I can't live like that. I'm going to go take care of Billy and then come back to let you go. I picked up all of Billy's clothes from the bedroom floor, where he had thrown them in his haste to get my wife to bed. Damn, it made me angry again as I walked out of the room with her. His cell phone fell to the floor. I noticed it was a BlackBerry and I got an idea. I threw Billy's clothes on our kitchen table and walked out into the garage. With Billy's car keys in hand, I got into his car and backed out into the driveway, closing the garage door behind me. I drove north out of town until I reached Interstate 20 and headed east to Longview, about a half hour away. I stopped at Walmart on the south side of Longview and bought 2 burner phones. I then went to 2 other Walmart stores in Longview and bought 2 more phones from each, so I had a total of 6. From there, I went to Radio Shack to meet my old friend. I sat down and explained my idea to him, and after a gentle warning about what I was about to do, he helped me get the rest of the equipment I would need. When I got home, I copied all of Billy's contacts, all of his text messages, and all of his voicemails to one of my new phones. Then, using available hardware and apps, I cloned his phone. Yes, I know it's illegal, but at the time I didn't care. I wanted to keep an eye on this bastard, and I was going to do it. Once that was done, I went down to the basement and had a heart-to-heart talk with Billy. I told him, "Billy, you're nothing but a jerk, and one of these days I'll find a reason to humiliate you. I know you're angry, and I know you wish you never saw me, but unfortunately, you did. That's what I expect. You will never say a word about this to a single living soul. You don't know Allison, and nothing has ever happened to you here in this house. You will never see or speak to Allison again. I will be watching, and any contact with her will result in your immediate demise. Do you understand me, you sack of shit?" He nodded his head affirmatively, but this did not satisfy me. I said, "Are you sure you understand me, you sack of shit?" This time he said weakly, "Yes, I understand you." I freed him from the handcuffs and told him, "Then get dressed and get out of my house and never, and I mean never, show your face here again." After he left, I reluctantly went up to my bedroom and released Allison. The bed was a mess, but I really didn't care. I told her, "I'm sorry you had to ruin everything here, but it can't be helped. I'll let you clean up after yourself." Then I threw a few things into the gym bag and told her, "I'm going to go away for a while to think things over. I'll be back to let you know what's about to happen." She tried to grab my hand to stop me and begged, "Please, JD, don't leave me. Please stay." "I am so sorry." I said, "Yes, I'm sorry too, but I have to go now, but I'll be back." I checked into the Staybridge Suites near the city center and spent most of Friday and Saturday evening thinking about what I'd like to do in the future. On Sunday morning, when I turned my cell phone back on, there were about 20 messages, most from Ellie. I didn't really want to listen to any of them, so I just skimmed through the ones Ellie wrote and listened to the rest. There was one from my boss, a couple from Ellie's sister, and one from Ellie's dad. I immediately called my boss to let him know I was okay and asked for a few days off. He didn't mind me taking a few days, but he told me to stay in touch. I realized I hadn't eaten since Friday night and realized that wasn't such a good idea. I went down to the hotel restaurant and ate a decent breakfast. I spent the rest of the day fishing at Tyler State Park. I caught a few nice bass on a jig and a worm, but didn't keep any of them. It's better to let them grow and let someone else have the fun of catching them. By lunchtime, I was tired and hot, so I headed back to Staybridge, showered, and then went out for dinner. Having decided to myself what I wanted to do, I went to bed and slept very well indeed. It was Monday, and I had spent the entire morning and most of the afternoon getting a few things done before returning home. It was around 7 p.m. when I walked into the house for the first time since I left on Friday night. Ellie was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. On the way home, I stopped to grab a couple of sandwiches and some chips, so I placed them on the table in front of us. She looked at them and then at me and said, "I'm really not hungry, JD." "I know you've probably lost your appetite," I said, "but you should really try to eat a little. After you eat, we'll talk." She reluctantly took the sandwich and took a bite. I think that first bite whetted her appetite, so she ate greedily until she had eaten the entire sandwich and all the chips. When she finished, she looked at me and smiled, but then burst into tears. "Oh, JD, I'm so sorry," she said, and she began to sob uncontrollably. When she finally calmed down, she went through the entire scam checklist. 1. It didn't mean anything to me, it was just sex. 2. I love you and never intended to hurt you. 3. I was going to end it. 4. Part of the blame lies with you because you were so obsessed and I was lonely, and so on and so on. When she finished, I asked, "Are you finished yet? I know who, when, and why, so nothing else matters to me. None of your statements mean shit to me. It was sex, but with someone other than me, so you shouldn't have done it. If you love me and didn't mean to hurt me, you shouldn't have done it. And yes, of course you were going to end it, maybe someday. And finally, if you were lonely, why didn't you spend time with your father and sister? No, you needed to find that bastard so you wouldn't feel alone. And it was my fault? My effort and obsession, as you put it, was to apprehend the kidnappers and rapists, and it turns out they were also murderers. I would say that my efforts were not an obsession, but dedication to duty and public safety." I continued, "Allison, I have no idea who you are anymore. The woman I married would never do what you did. She would never allow herself to be treated the way Billy treated you. and she would never think so badly of me that she would betray me the way you did. I have no idea where the woman I married is now, but I'm sure she's gone forever. I'm sure I'll never be able to get her back. It's too late for that. I'm also afraid that the man you married no longer exists either. I used to believe that if you did the right things in life, everything would be fine. I've lived my whole life by this principle, and look where it got me. I don't believe it anymore. I don't think it matters what we do anymore. So the man you married is gone, too. Ellie kept crying while I told her all this. I know it was hard for her to hear, but at the same time, it was true. It all came to me over the weekend as I struggled to figure out who I would be now. Oh, I knew, but I wasn't going to tell anyone about it. So, Allison, I said, I'm leaving. I put the folder with papers on the table. These are divorce papers. Let me tell you what's in them. First of all, you have something that I want back. My great-grandmother's engagement ring that I gave you, I want it back. This is part of my family history, and I want to keep it in my family. I'm sorry to ask because I really thought we could pass it on to a daughter or son someday, but that won't happen to you anymore, so I want it back. Oh, God. Her sobs doubled in intensity, but I continued. Please give me the ring now. She looked at me pleadingly, but I just shook my head, and she reluctantly took it off her finger and handed it to me. Secondly, Allison, I continued, you know that I receive money from my family foundation. Some of it is in our accounts with our investments and savings, and I don't want you to have any of it. I will continue to receive money from my trust so that I have everything I need. More sobbing. Crap. I intend to keep 100% of my pension, I added. Since your IRA account has almost the same amount, I see no reason to share my pension in any way. Finally, I said, home. As you know, the house does not belong to us. This is also part of my family trust and will continue to be so. This trust was created long before you and I were married and will be considered premarital property. You have no legal right to the house or to any family trust. But that's why I'm giving you most of our money and investments. They are approximately equal in cost to a house. Besides, you, of course, must leave this house within a week from today. I give you a week to find another place to live and remove all your things. Again, there are household items that were part of the family trust that I expect you to keep when you leave. You can guess what will happen if you don't do this. Of course, her sobs started again. So, Allison, I sighed, that's all. This is my proposal. This is in no way negotiable. Have your lawyer look at the papers. Sign them or don't sign them. I really don't care. Anyway, I'm leaving. In any case, I will no longer be your husband. Our marriage is over, either legally sealed or practically, but it is over. If you sign the papers, give them to my lawyer, and he will complete the process. Of course, by this time, she was inconsolable. There's one more thing we need to do before I go, I said. We're going for a ride. We walked out to my patrol car, and I told Allison to sit in the back seat. She didn't know it, but I wanted her there so she couldn't get out. By this time, it was around 9 p.m., and the city's nightlife was starting to bustle as usual. We entered the more crime-ridden part of town, and I pulled over to the side of the road near one of the hottest spots for rent. There were several women standing around, and I walked over and talked to them for a minute. Allison was still sitting in the back seat of the car, not understanding what was happening. I took one of the women by the hand and led her to the car. Get in the back seat, Brenda, I said. She climbed inside and sat next to Allison. As I drove away, I saw both women in the back seat looking at each other appreciatively. After we left this part of town, I pulled into a shopping center parking lot and started talking. Allison, I said, this is Brenda. I'm going to ask her some questions, and I want you to just listen to what she has to say. Brenda, what is your real name? Damn it, JD, you know who I am. I know, but I want you to just answer all my questions, Brenda. Okay, I really am Judy Parker. Are you married? She took a deep breath and said, no more. You were married? Yes, after Ron Parker. Who is Ron Parker? He's an assistant district attorney in the city. And why aren't you married to Ron Parker anymore? He divorced me because I cheated on him. And Brenda, who are you now? Damn you, JD. You know who I am. I'm a prostitute. Are you happy now, asshole? No, Judy, I'm not happy, and I know you're not happy either. But why don't you tell Allison now how you became a slut? Don't overlook anything. By this time, Allison's eyes were bulging and her mouth was open. Well, Judy began, it all started when I met Billy Marconi at a social event. He was handsome and so charming, and he really enjoyed being around me. My husband was so engrossed in chatting with the big shots at the party that he seemed to just ignore me, and Billy stepped in to make me feel good. We drank a few drinks together, and before I knew it, we were already on the patio, and he was already caressing my ass and breasts. He whispered things in my ear that I had never heard from a man before, how he would make me feel if he could be alone with me. I was vulnerable, and he took full advantage of it, but of course I didn't know that at the time. Before we went back inside, we agreed to have lunch the next day at the Carlton Hotel restaurant. Of course you know what happened. We ended up in one of the rooms, and Billy fucked me. I liked it. He was so attentive and so wonderful. This began a long journey to where I am now. He started coming to our house when Ron was away on business. Sometimes he would have sex with me all day, and I would have so many climaxes that I could barely see clearly, much less think clearly. Then he started bringing in some weed, then eventually some cocaine, and I got hooked. One day, Ron caught us and threw me out. Billy took me in, and the long road to my demise suddenly became shorter. Before I knew what had happened to me, I was hooked on drugs, and Billy was selling me to anyone and everyone. Then he found someone new to work with and just sent me to his stable of girls. So that's where I am today. I saw Allison just shaking in the back seat. She was shocked. I asked Brenda, "How many girls does Billy have in the stable, Brenda?" She answered, "I know of 4 other girls who are performing tricks for him now. From time to time, one of them goes to the hospital or to the cemetery, and a new one appears." "Last question, Brenda," I said. "What would you do with Billy Marconi if he were in the back seat with you right now?" "I would gouge his eyes out with my nails, cut off his genitals, and shove them down his fucking throat. I made a terrible mistake when I got involved with him, and he ruined my life. Most days I just wish I was dead." "Well, Brenda," I continued, "one day you might get a chance to do it with Billy Marconi. This time he messed with the wrong guy." She smiled at me and said, "JD, if you ever give me this chance, you will have free sex with me for life." Allison cringed and gave her a rather angry look. This is too damn bad, Allison, I thought, but I doubted I would ever accept Brenda's offer. I gave Brenda a couple $100 and asked if I could take her home instead of driving back to her place of work. She thought it might be a good idea, so we went to her house. After we dropped Brenda off, I drove Ellie back to the house. We sat in the patrol car for a few minutes before I let her out and made my closing speech. Allison, I still refused to call her Allie ever again. So now you see what a slippery slope you started on. You can see how you came so close to flushing your life down the drain. You can see where your actions led. I did this last kind thing for you because I love the woman I married and because I don't want her to become another Brenda. We're done. But you don't have to be another Brenda. Take control of your life and be who you are meant to be. Build yourself a good life. She started to say something, but I silenced her. Allison, I have nothing more to tell you. It's too late to say anything. From now on, your future is completely in your own hands. Goodbye. Now get out of the car. I opened the door to let her out, got back into the car, and drove away. My new life was about to begin, but that would have to wait. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Third story. Bill Trebelove stood frozen and helpless as he watched his beloved wife cling warmly to their next-door neighbor, Roger. Emily smiled so radiantly that she seemed to glow from within. She wore a light yellow dress that left little to the imagination. Her slender body fit perfectly into Roger's arms, as if they were two pieces of a puzzle. They laughed, surrounded by friends and neighbors with familiar but strangely indistinguishable faces. Roger whispered something in Emily's ear, and it made her giggle like a little girl. She playfully slapped him on the shoulder and then stood on her tiptoes to kiss him. Bill opened his mouth to scream, but couldn't say a word. He struggled to breathe. It seemed to him that he was underwater. He began to panic and felt his chest tighten and his pulse quicken. Roger looked him straight in the eye and acknowledged his presence with a wicked smile. He winked and kissed Emily again, right there, in front of all their friends and neighbors. This time, when he kissed her, his tongue protruded grotesquely from his mouth, and his hands boldly explored her body. He lifted the hem of Emily's dress, exposing her bare buttocks to the warm summer air, and squeezed her firm ass with his well-groomed hands. She responded with playful coos and returned his kiss with wanton lust. Roger broke their kiss and looked back at Bill. This time his smile turned into laughter. He pointed his finger at Bill, and all heads turned to follow his direction. The surrounding audience burst into raucous laughter. Some laughed so hard they spilled their drinks. Even Emily couldn't hide her laughter behind her graceful hand. Bill followed the crowd's gaze and lowered his head. He was naked, completely naked. He walked up Willed Eid and gasping for air. He turned to the table next to the bed, and at that very moment the alarm clock rang. He turned it off and turned to the other side of the bed. Like every morning for the last 3 years, he was exhausted and sleep-deprived. At first, Emily thought it was just the flu. She started vomiting and could not swallow any food or liquid. Then constipation set in, and this led to bloating and unbearable abdominal pain. When Bill found her curled up in the fetal position on their bathroom floor one evening, that's when he finally insisted she go to the emergency room and have someone check her. When the doctors ordered an ultrasound, the first thought that came to Bill's mind was that she was pregnant. "I don't want another child," he thought. "We finally kicked the other 2 out of the house. I'm too old to start all over again." In the years to come, he would spend countless lonely nights brooding over the selfishness of that thought and berating himself for having even thought of it. "There is no reason to panic," the doctor assured them, but the expression on his face said otherwise. The doctor described a suspicious area on Emily's ovaries and explained that a laparoscopy would be needed to get a better look at the area. Although his insides clenched with worry, Bill maintained a calm demeanor and insisted that there was no reason to worry. "We'll get through this," he assured her, gently stroking her arm as she waited to be wheeled away for the procedure. "Whatever happens to us, we will get through it. Remember when Janie got sick? We thought we would lose her forever. But that did not happen. We went through this together. Remember when we first got married? We lived in this shitty little apartment in this rundown neighborhood?" Emily smiled bravely at him. "We didn't have a penny. And then I made it even worse by getting pregnant." "Yeah, well, I guess I had something to do with it too," he replied with a smile. "And you were worried that we wouldn't have enough money to raise the child. But I told you that everything would be fine. I told you I take classes in the evenings, and I will make enough money so that you don't have to work and you can stay home and raise our child. Eventually, I would make enough money that we could move to a nicer place." "And we did it," she said, squeezing his hand and looking at him with sparkling eyes. "You worked so hard and provided for our family so well. I couldn't have asked for a better husband and father to our children. Well, don't talk like it's all over. We still have a lot to do." "I'm scared, Bill. I'm scared too, Em. But we will get through this. I promise." As Emily lay in the recovery room after her procedure, her doctor walked into the waiting room with the same serious expression Bill had seen earlier. "A tumor was found," the doctor explained, "and a sample was taken. The results would be known soon, and there was still hope that it was benign. However, given her symptoms," the doctor added bluntly, "you should prepare for the worst." Bill wandered down the corridor. The floor barely felt under his feet, and the walls became foggy and colorless. Emotions overwhelmed him so suddenly that he was not prepared for it. He quickly turned into the nearest toilet, entered the stall farthest from the entrance, locked the door, and collapsed on the floor. He was taught to believe that real men don't cry. But for the first time in his adult life, he cried like a child. Ovarian cancer. 4th stage. It seemed like an impossible diagnosis. Cruel joke. Just a few days before she was admitted to the hospital, Emily was as happy and healthy as ever. How could the disease develop so much in such a short period of time? Bill refused to accept this diagnosis. He told his wife they would seek a second opinion. If this opinion were the same, then they would be looking for a third and fourth. No matter how many doctors it takes, they will find someone who has the courage to make a more optimistic diagnosis. "Bill, I love you," Emily said, smiling. "But darling, you need to face the truth. This is happening, and there is nothing you or I can do to stop it." "Bullshit," he said. He felt his anger bubble to the surface. "Honey, I'm so sorry I'm putting you through this." He looked at her in amazement. Now she was living through this incomprehensible moment, peering into the dark depths of her own death, and her main concern was him. Over the next few months, he would continue to be amazed at this woman's strength and character. Together, they decided that she would undergo chemotherapy to prolong her life as much as possible. Bill was never a good helper and tried to avoid being around sick people whenever possible. However, with no other choice, he quickly learned and became a first-class nurse. He helped her in and out of bed, took her to the bathroom, and cleaned up the vomit from the bucket she kept by the bed. Towards the end, he learned how to clean her drainage tube and change her IVs. The end came faster than he expected. One evening, they were watching TV. Emily lay in her makeshift hospital bed that Bill had set up in the living room at her request. Suddenly, he felt that something had changed. He looked at her, and she seemed calmer and more peaceful than usual. He hesitantly walked over to her bed and took her hand in his, being careful not to squeeze too hard. She didn't move a single muscle. Fighting back the tears welling in his eyes, he placed a couple of fingers against the main artery in her neck. There was no pulse. Months passed in a gloomy fog. At first, friends and relatives visited him often, but over time these visits became less and less frequent. His children lived out of state, but they called often to check on him. Bill was busy around the house doing things he had neglected while he was taking care of Emily. He found that as long as his mind was occupied, he could not think about her. It wasn't that he didn't want to think about her, but he found that when he did, it incapacitated him for hours. Over time, he learned to control it a little better and focus on the pleasant memories rather than the horror of her final dying weeks. During the day, it was easy to keep his mind busy with work or various projects around the house. At night, he was left alone with his thoughts. Most nights, he just cried himself to sleep. It got to the point where he dreaded going to bed and found himself going to bed later and later and sleeping less and less. It was during one of these sleepless nights, as he lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the black ceiling above his head, that his life, or at least the perception of his life, changed forever. He thought about the email Emily wrote to him years ago. It was sweet and romantic, and it filled his heart with overwhelming joy when he read it. He understood better how much he meant to his wife, and how much she loved him with all her heart. He would give anything to read those words again, he thought. Having gotten rid of the charade of trying to sleep, he got out of bed and walked into his office to turn on his laptop. He scrolled to the bottom of his inbox and confirmed his fears that he had deleted all his old emails. He slammed his fist on the table and sighed. Then a thought occurred to him, and he switched to Emily's email. She wasn't very careful about keeping her email account organized, and it drove him crazy at times because she would often delete emails that he thought she should have saved. But she wasn't computer savvy enough to know that her deleted emails weren't actually deleted until she emptied them from the trash. Sure enough, when he scrolled through the deleted items folder on her account, he found messages from several years earlier. He remembered that the email she sent him was written about 5 years ago, and he went through the messages from that year, one by one. He paused when he discovered a message from their next-door neighbor, Roger. It was entitled, "About Last Night," and dated July 5th. He seemed to remember attending a 4th of July barbecue in the neighborhood that year. In fact, this was the last year that he and Emily went to this annual event. With a curious look on his face, Bill clicked on the email, and it opened. "Hi, Emily. I just want to say that I really enjoyed last night. I've wanted to do this for years. Sorry we were interrupted. If you ever want to finish what we started, you know where I live. Roger. P.S. Don't worry about Phil. I talked to him, and he's not going to tell anyone." "What the hell?" Bill muttered under his breath. What did Roger mean? What did he enjoy doing? What had he wanted to do for years? What did he mean by finishing what they started? And what did Phil have to do with this? Bill had never even considered the remote possibility that Emily had ever cheated on him during any moment of their 25 years together. She was as devoted as any of their acquaintances and friends. Sure, they went through some rough patches like any married couple, but their relationship was rock solid. On the other hand, he remembered that Emily had been drinking heavily that evening. She didn't usually get drunk, but on this particular evening, one of the neighbors brought homemade wine, which Emily thought was wonderful, and she overdid it a little. When she suggested that they make different plans for Independence Day in subsequent years, he assumed that she was embarrassed for being so drunk in front of the neighbors. But perhaps there was another reason. He quickly searched for a response to this email or any other emails from Roger, but found nothing. He closed his email program, and his desktop wallpaper showed the smiling face of his beautiful wife on her 30th birthday. He stared at the photograph from a new perspective. Was it possible that she was not as loving and faithful a wife as he believed her to be? That night, a recurring nightmare began. The next morning, Bill stood at the window of his house, sipping coffee. He looked across the street at the house where Roger and Chelsea lived with their 2 children. Their house was the largest in the area, and the lawn in front of it was immaculately manicured. The black Lexus, sparkling clean as always, was parked in the driveway. Bill never liked Roger, from the very first day he moved to the area. Roger was a trial lawyer in Philadelphia, and apparently a very successful one. He was the kind of guy who pretended to be humble, but at the same time took every opportunity to let you know that he was better than you in every way. He was more handsome, fitter, made more money, took better vacations, owned a nicer house and a nicer car, and married a more beautiful woman. His wife Chelsea was a typical trophy wife. She was several years younger, with long blonde hair, huge breasts, and a fake tan. Almost everyone in the neighborhood suspected that Roger was constantly cheating on her, but she was too stupid to understand it. Their children were terribly spoiled and given everything they ever wanted. The plan was to sip coffee and wait for Roger to leave the house. Bill will show him the email and, if his suspicions are correct, knock out some of this asshole's pearly whites. However, as he took a sip of his coffee, the holes in the plan became apparent. Roger would simply deny any wrongdoing. The email was vague enough that it could be interpreted in any number of ways, and he was skilled enough with words to spin it any way he wanted. Even if he confessed and Bill knocked him out, Roger would sue him in a heartbeat, and that idiot would own his house. Bill downed the rest of his coffee just as Roger walked out of his front door, dressed in an expensive suit. He strutted over to his Lexus, got behind the wheel, and backed out of the driveway. Bill watched the car speed down the road and noticed another neighbor, Phil, standing in his yard, watering his plants. "This is an opportunity," Bill muttered under his breath. Adrenaline rushed through his veins as he quickly walked towards Phil's house. Phil turned around just as Bill reached his driveway, smiled, and waved. However, his smile disappeared when he noticed Bill's expression. "Is everything all right, Bill?" asked Phil. "No, not really," Bill answered. "I have a question for you." "Well, okay," Phil said hesitantly. "Ask. Why didn't you tell me that Roger had my wife?" All the blood drained from Phil's face, and his jaw dropped. He took a step back and nearly tripped over a hedge. "What? How? Damn, Bill!" "I didn't want to cause any problems, that's all. When did you find out about this?" "Just now," Bill said. "Oh, shit," Phil said, lowering his head. "I'm sorry, Bill. Why don't you tell me what happened?" Bill asked. The rage inside him made his muscles tremble. Look, Bill, it was a long time ago, and Emily, she's gone now. There is no need to dig. Bill took a step towards Phil. His eyes pierced right through him, and he looked into his face furiously, clenching his fists. Tell me what happened, right now. Okay, Phil said, raising his hands in defense. But I really think you're making a mistake by digging into this. Bill stood still and waited patiently as Phil took a deep breath and fidgeted nervously. He looked like he was about to throw up. It was at a 4th of July party a few years ago, he began. Do you remember what it was in that house at the other end of the block? Well, I didn't want to walk all that way, so I went there. Later that night, I went out to get some things from my car, and that's when I saw some movement in Roger's car. What did you see, Phil? At first, I wasn't sure, but as I got closer, I also heard some noise. I looked out the back window, and that's when I saw them. Roger and Emily. What were they doing, Phil? Bill asked. The veins on his forehead were bulging and his eyes were burning. Come on, dude. You know what they did? I'm not going to spell it out. I need to hear the words, Phil. They had sex, Phil said too loudly. He looked around quickly and then spoke more quietly. She was kind of lying in the back seat and he was on top, you know. Bill's hands involuntarily clenched into fists again, and he felt an irresistible urge to hit the nearest object. Phil must have read his mind. Hey, man, you asked for it, he said, still raising his hands. I didn't want to tell you. Yes, you are a real friend. Bill spat. You hid this from me for 5 years. I didn't think it would benefit anyone. It's not my place to interfere. I know Roger chatted to you a little after that. Let me guess. He offered you free services from his law office in exchange for your silence. Oh my God, Bill, who do you take me for? You know what, Phil? Bill said, retreating. I don't know. I don't know what kind of person you are anymore. Emily knelt down and ran her hands down the front of Roger's khaki shorts. She unzipped his fly and reached inside, removing his manly tool. She smiled and cooed. She purred. Is that all for me? She began to work on his male instrument, giving caresses. While Emily continued to please him, Roger raised the imported beer in Bill's direction and nodded. The other neighbors turned to face him, all with the same sly grins. The nightmares always ended the same way. All the neighbors laughed and pointed at Bill as he stood naked and frozen in place. How many neighbors were privy to this secret? How many of them laughed at him behind his back, just like they did in his dreams? Everything he thought he knew about his wife and his marriage was a lie. She was nothing more than a dirty, cheating slut, and their marriage was a complete sham. That juicy letter she wrote to him, which he had cherished all these years, was simply an admission of guilt. How could she love him so much and value their marriage so much when she could spread her legs for a fucking asshole like Roger? How many others has she done this for? Bill stared at the house across the street with its perfect lawn. Of course, Roger had nothing to do with the state of this lawn. He hired someone to trim it and fertilize it. This man has never done a single hard job in his entire life. How righteous would it be to go there right now and dump a bunch of rock salt on that lawn? Maybe write the word scam in huge letters so everyone in the neighborhood knows who this sack of crap really is. White-hot rage flared within him. He grabbed the nearest object, symbolically a frame with a photograph of Emily, and threw it at the wall, breaking it into pieces. He looked around the room for anything else to throw and was disgusted when he saw pictures and reminders of Emily everywhere. He went down to the basement and emerged with a large container, which he filled with all the objects he found that reminded him of her. He stuffed the container into the closet and slammed the door. Breathing heavily, he sank into his favorite deep chair and opened a bottle of beer. Revenge replaced grief as his new consuming obsession. Roger simply could not be allowed to get away with what he did. He deserved his punishment, and Bill would be the one to inflict it. Roger needed to know what it was like to be humiliated. He needs to get over the loss, like Bill did. He deserved to lose his wife, his home, his children, and his beloved car. Everything that mattered to him had to be wrested from him. It took Bill several days to come up with a plan. It took several more to find the right woman to carry out this plan. Once he found her, he met her at a cafe to make sure she fit the bill and that she was willing and able to follow orders. Money was no object, and he paid her generously. After days of planning, the day of reckoning finally arrived. With his heart pounding, Bill knocked on the door of the house across the street. Chelsea responded, looking puzzled. "What happened, Bill?" she asked sweetly. "It's okay," Bill said, "but I need you to come with me. I need to show you something." "What's the matter?" she asked, looking worried. "This is something very important to you," he explained. "That's all I can say right now. Just come with me, please." She continued to question him as they drove the short distance to the country club, but Bill was adamant in his refusal to answer her questions. He almost felt sorry for her. However, she deserved to know the truth just as much as he did. He pulled into the parking lot of a country club, and Chelsea suddenly panicked. "Why are we here?" she asked. "Is there something wrong with Roger? Do you know he's playing golf here today?" "Yes, I know," Bill answered calmly. He looked at the time on the dashboard. "Follow me," he said, getting out of the car. He led her on foot around the country club and down a short path through a wooded area to a neighboring property. It was empty except for one lone car parked at the far end. "It looks like our Lexus," Chelsea said. "Why is it parked over there?" "Let's see," Bill said, trying his best to suppress a smile. As they approached the car, Bill slowed his pace, allowing Chelsea to walk ahead of him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone, clicking it to switch to camera and then clicking it again to switch to video mode. What was about to happen would be so beautiful that he knew he would want to relive this moment over and over again. Chelsea approached the car cautiously. When she got close enough to see what was going on in the back seat, she gasped loudly and covered her mouth with her hands. She froze in place for a moment. She then rushed to the back door handle and forced it open. "You fucking son of a bitch!" she screamed. She leaned into the back seat and slammed her fists into Roger's torso as he raised his hands in defense. She continued screaming and punching, and then grabbed an armful of clothes from the back seat. She slammed the door with her foot. Her face was stained with leaked makeup, and her usually perfect hair was a mess. Roger appeared on the other side of the car and took a sneaky look around before ducking around the back of the car. "Give me my clothes!" he shouted to his wife. He was completely naked, and his hands covered his private parts. "Fuck you!" Chelsea shouted and ran to the front of the car, still holding her clothes. "I'm not kidding, Chelsea!" he shouted. "Give me my fucking clothes!" "Fuck you!" she shouted again. He chased her around the car for 2 laps, while the scantily clad woman in the back seat quietly slipped out and ran up to Bill. Roger stopped on the passenger side of the car, and Chelsea looked over the roof at him. "Chelsea, please give me my clothes," Roger said in a calm voice, "and we can talk about this." In one swift motion, she opened the door, tossed her clothes inside, and slid behind the wheel. She locked the doors before Roger could grab the handle. She looked at her husband with mascara smeared on his cheeks, raised her middle finger in the air, and drove off, tires squealing along the road. Roger stood in the middle of the parking lot with a dumbfounded expression on his face. "Chelsea, you fucking bitch! Come back here!" he shouted in a shrill voice and jumped up and down, still covering his genitals with one hand. For the first time, Roger seemed to notice Bill. It took him a moment to realize who it was, and another moment to realize that he was being recorded. "Bill, what the hell are you doing here?" he shouted. "Turn off the damn camera. Actually, just give me the phone." He held out his hand as if he were a school teacher demanding that her students spit out the gum. "Fuck you! You're fucking crazy if you think I'm going to give you my phone," Bill laughed. "Give me that damn phone!" Roger screamed in the same shrill tone. He took a few steps towards Bill. "I'm telling you right now," Bill said, pressing a button on his phone and putting it in his pocket. "If you take another step towards me, I'll knock the hell out of you." Roger stopped dead in his tracks. He looked past Bill to the woman hiding behind him. He seemed overcome with panic and confusion, and his eyes filled with tears. "Why?" asked Roger. "You bastard know damn well why," Bill replied. "Come on, honey." He took the woman's hand and led her back to the main parking lot. Roger froze in place and stared into the distance. "Here's the other half," Bill said, handing the woman a thick envelope as they approached his car. "As agreed." "Thank you," she said. "I have to say that it was a lot easier than I thought." "You mean to seduce him?" "Yes," she said, adjusting her top. "Do not get me wrong. I've never had problems picking men." "Well, you're his type," Bill said matter-of-factly. "And how do you know this?" she asked playfully. Bill turned to her. "You are very similar to my wife." "Oh," she answered quietly. "I'm guessing you also knew that he wouldn't hesitate to have sex in his car, right?" "He's a predictable guy," Bill said with a chuckle. "He seems to have an unhealthy fetish for this car." "So, I think everything went as you expected." "Better. Much better than I ever could have expected." "Thank you." They drove in silence for some time. She smiled. "Okay, but how did you know that he would cheat on his wife?" "Another easy question," he answered. "Once a cheater, always a cheater." When Bill got home, he opened a beer and watched the video on his phone over and over again, laughing until his stomach hurt. A fluffy red cat purred at his feet. "Felix," he said, scratching the cat behind the ears, "I haven't laughed so hard in ages." If only he could share this video with the world, he thought. He took another sip of his beer and nearly choked on it in realization. "Felix," he said with a big smile, "we're not done making that asshole pay for what he did." He ran up the stairs and headed straight to his office. He turned on the laptop and connected his phone. He created a YouTube account, and within minutes, his video was uploaded for everyone to see. He laughed uncontrollably as he captioned it with the headline, "Wife Catch Husband Cheating, Fun Guaranteed." Incredibly, the video went viral within a week, receiving more than 400,000 views. A week later, views exceeded 2 million. Bill's Facebook friends shared the video, unaware that Bill was the one who uploaded it. When a popular television show aired it, the video went mega viral, exceeding over 100 million views. News vans began appearing across the street from Bill's house. Reporters showed up at Bill's door, asking about the whereabouts of his neighbors. People began creating parody videos, making fun of Roger's high-pitched voice and setting it to music. One of these videos also went viral, further increasing views. Roger was forced to resign from his law firm. He became too notorious and recognizable for juries to take seriously. Soon after, Chelsea filed for divorce. She ended up with a house, children, and, in a delightfully righteous twist, a car. Rumors circulated around the area that she smashed the car with a sledgehammer and then sold it for scrap. Bill watched the whole thing with stunned detachment. Justice prevailed, and he did not regret what he had done. In his opinion, now he and Roger were even, and yet he felt a cold and bitter emptiness inside him. He wasn't sure why he still felt this way until he heard a knock on the door. It was a cold winter day, and he had just added a log to the fire when he heard an unexpected visitor at his door. When he opened the door, he was shocked to see Marilyn standing there. She was Emily's best friend. They had been friends since elementary school. He hasn't seen her since the funeral. "Marilyn," he said, standing in the doorway with a confused look, "what are you doing here?" "Hi, Bill," she said with an awkward smile. "Can I come in?" "Of course," he said. They shared an awkward moment of hesitation and then hugged each other. He led her to the chairs in front of the fireplace. "Can I get you something to drink?" "No, thank you," she said. "I won't stay long." He stared into her eyes, puzzled. "What can I do for you?" "Well," she said, "I saw the video on the internet." She pointed towards Roger's old house across the street. "I'm almost sure the whole world saw this video." Bill laughed. "I have a feeling that you published it," she said. "Really?" he asked. "What?" "I just have a feeling, that's all," she interrupted. I talked to Phil. She let the words sink in and looked at him meaningfully. Bill shifted uncomfortably in his chair. So what? He asked. The expression on his face was stone cold. He told me that, you know, she continued. And I'm here because I made a promise to Emily. I made this promise just before she died. She told me that if you ever find out what happened, to give it to you. Bill watched intently as Marilyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. On it, in Emily's handwriting, was written one word, Bill. Marilyn handed it to him and he stared at it impassively. Several moments passed and neither of them moved a muscle. All that could be heard was the crackling of the fireplace and the ticking of the clock. Without warning, Bill snatched the envelope from Marilyn's hands and threw it into the fire. Marilyn rushed to the fireplace and tried to pull it out, but Bill grabbed her hand. "What did you do?" she screamed, eyes wide and mouth agape. "Now we're even," he said calmly. "Your dying wife wrote you this letter," she said. "How could you just throw it away like that? What do you mean you're even?" "I never had the opportunity to confront her," he stated in the same calm tone, "and now she'll never have the chance to explain. But you have to hear her side of the story. Damn her fucking version of this story," he shouted, causing Marilyn to recoil. What could she say to explain herself? "I'm really sorry. Isn't it what you think? It didn't mean anything to me? Was it just a mistake? Was it just sex? Was I drunk? Yeah, well, that's it." Marilyn sat in silence for a minute, stunned. She stared at him as he paced around the room. "She never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. "You were the love of her life. You know it." "I don't know anything else," he shouted. "It was all a lie. Our whole marriage was a lie." "No, it wasn't like that," Marilyn screamed, jumping to her feet. "She loved you, damn it. And yes, it was a mistake. People make mistakes, Bill. She drank too much, was not thinking well, and made a mistake. This one mistake doesn't mean your entire marriage was a sham, and it doesn't mean she never loved you." "Yes. Well, for me it is." Marilyn stared at him, but he refused to look at her. She looked around the room and saw empty shelves and tables where family photographs had once stood. She shook her head and sighed. "Bill, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen." Finally, he looked at her. His eyes filled with tears and he swallowed hard. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. It's not about the person who harmed you, it's about you. It's not about letting someone off the hook. It's about allowing yourself the freedom to put your past behind you and move on with your life. He stood silent and motionless. She quietly walked up to him and hugged him, holding him tightly to her. She then headed to the door and left. It was spring when Bill heard a knock on his door again. Marilyn stood on the porch, smiling curiously. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked, pointing to a truck loaded with items in the driveway. A sign on the front lawn said the house had been sold. "I'm just collecting the last of my things," Bill said with a smile. "Come in." "Looks like I caught you just in time," she remarked, pointing to the almost empty house. "I just happened to be in the neighborhood, saw the sign and the loaded truck, and put two and two together." "You should have been a detective," he teased. She responded with a smile. "I'm loading things up and these are the latest." "Do you need any help?" she suggested. "No, but thank you. I think I can handle this." "So, where are you going?" "Florida," he said. "It's time to get away from the cold. There is a pensioners' commune where the ratio of women to men is almost 2-to-1. I like these odds." He gave her a devilish grin. She looked around the room and stopped when she noticed a photograph on the end table. It showed Bill and Emily smiling happily and looking healthy and young. "Well, I'm glad to see you've moved on," she said with a smile. "I'm happy for you." "Thank you, Marilyn. I decided to follow the advice of my good old friend. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.